Welcome to the second module of this WHO online training course for mass gatherings in the context of COVID-19. In this module, we will be learning how to conduct a risk assessment for a generic mass gathering. For the purpose of this training, we will review the 3 risk assessment tools WHO has developed through their WHO Mass Gathering Expert Cell. The first is the generic risk assessment and will be covered in this module, Module 2, and could be useful for all mass gatherings. But as these mass gatherings can significantly differ, we have also provided a sports-specific risk assessment and a religious risk assessment that take into consideration the additional factors specific to these types of mass gatherings. The sports-specific and religious-specific risk assessments will be discussed in more detail in later modules. All of these mass gathering risk assessments should be read in conjunction with WHO's key planning recommendations for mass gatherings in the context of the current COVID-19 outbreak interim guidance. The purpose of these risk assessments is to enable the organizers to understand and manage any additional risks for COVID-19 their mass gathering may have. At the end of this module, you will be able to list the steps involved in a generic mass gathering risk assessment, and determine an overall risk score using the WHO risk assessment tool we will be describing, taking into account modification and mitigation measures that can be implemented to reduce your risk. For the generic risk assessment, the WHO website has 3 links for you to explore, which include the instructions, the tool itself, and the decision tree, which provides an overview of the entire process. The generic risk assessment tool also has 3 parts to it, as you can see on the decision tree on this slide. The first is the risk assessment itself, which consists of 4 questions answered in an Excel worksheet. At the end of the risk assessment, you receive a risk score. The second part of this tool is to determine if any modifications can be made to the mass gathering to reduce this risk score. These questions are provided in both the decision tree and in the instructions. At the end of this part, you will determine what your modified risk score is based on your answers to these questions. The third and final part of this tool is the mitigation measures, which are also provided in the Excel worksheet with the risk assessment and found in the link provided on the WHO website. Once you receive your mitigation score, you combine the modified risk score and the mitigation score to determine the overall risk of the mass gathering. That is, the risk of transmission and further spread of COVID-19 in the country should the mass gathering be held. Let's break these parts of the tool down further. First, the risk assessment. Remember to use the accompanying WHO COVID-19 Generic Risk Assessment Excel file to conduct this risk assessment. Also, remember that the risk assessment should be reviewed and conducted regularly during the planning activities and updated immediately before handover to the operational phase for the mass gathering, especially in light of the rapidly evolving outbreak. WHO guidance and situation reports on COVID-19 should be referenced while conducting this risk assessment. The COVID-19 risk assessment for the event must be coordinated and integrated with the host country's national COVID-19 risk assessment and should include input from the local public health authorities, along with consulting WHO's updated technical guidance and ensuring that there is an up-to-date evaluation of the epidemiological situation. 4 questions are assessed in this risk assessment and include: 1. Will the event take place in a host country with documented active local transmission, or in other words, in a place with community spread? 2. Will the event include international participants from countries that have documented active local transmission, or in other words, a place with community spread? 3. Will the event include a significant number of participants at higher risk of severe disease? These would be people over 65 years of age and people with underlying health conditions. And 4. Will the event be primarily indoors, and will people be in close contact with each other for a prolonged period of time? You must answer yes or no for each of these questions to receive your risk score. In the Excel sheet provided, you must place a 1 in the corresponding box if your answer is yes, and 0 if your answer is no. Risk scores range from 0, which is considered very low, to 4, which is defined as very high. Now, as the decision tree shows, we move to part 2 of the process, which is to determine if modifications can change this risk score. To see if the risk score can be changed, 4 questions are asked to see if the mass gathering can be modified. Again, you must answer yes or no for each of these questions. However, you must only answer yes to a question here if you're able to input a new modification after the original risk assessment has been performed. You must answer no if you cannot perform this modification, or if this question is not applicable, or if you answered no in the original risk assessment to a related question. The 4 questions are: 1. Can the mass gathering be modified so it can be held virtually? 2. Can the mass gathering be modified so that there will be no international participation? 3. Can the mass gathering be modified so those at risk will no longer attend? Remember, those considered at risk are people over the age of 65 or with underlying health conditions. And 4. Can the mass gathering be modified so that the event will be held outdoors and with limited close contact with other people? The decision tree explains how you receive your modified risk score as the final step in this part. The modified risk score depends on how many of these questions you answer yes to and what your original risk score was. Once you have received your modified risk score, you are ready for the final part of this tool, the mitigation checklist. The mitigation checklist is the third and final part of this tool. Mitigation measures are meant to reduce the risk that the mass gathering event will facilitate COVID-19 virus transmission. Together with the modified risk assessment score, the mitigation measures will contribute to the decision matrix and influence the assessment of the total risk of transmission and further spread of COVID-19 for the mass gathering. As with the risk assessment, you must use the accompanying WHO COVID-19 Generic Risk Assessment Excel file to conduct the mitigation checklist. Mitigation checklists cover a variety of topics, including understanding the overview of the current COVID-19 situation by event organizers, event emergency preparedness and response plans, stakeholder and partner coordination, command and control, risk communication, public health awareness of COVID-19 before and during the event, and surge capacity. You must complete the entire mitigation checklist and answer yes, completed, maybe in progress, or no, not considered for each question. In the Excel sheet provided, you must place a 2 in the corresponding box if your answer is yes, completed, a 1 if your answer is maybe in progress, and a 0 if your answer is no, not considered. Dependent on your answers to these questions and the weighting of importance they have been given by an external group of experts, you will receive a total mitigation score as a percentage. The total mitigation score is divided into quartiles. That is, 0 to 25% is considered very unprepared to mitigate COVID-19 impacts. 26 to 50% is considered somewhat unprepared to mitigate COVID-19 impacts. 51 to 75% is considered somewhat prepared to mitigate COVID-19 impacts. And 76 to 100% is considered very prepared to mitigate COVID-19 impacts. As the decision tree shows, depending on your modified risk score and your mitigation score, you will receive an overall score for the mass gathering event of very low, low, moderate, or very high. These are the 4 colored boxes you see at the bottom of the decision tree. Another way to determine the overall risk score is to use the decision matrix found in the instructional document and risk assessment Excel file. The decision matrix combines the risk score and the mitigation score to provide a color determination which identifies the total risk of transmission and further spread of COVID-19, or the overall score. A color determination key is also provided that describes the total risk for each color. These risks range from very low to very high. Now, before we move on to the religious and sports-specific risk assessment tools, let's use this generic risk assessment tool in an example mass gathering. Let us imagine a business mass gathering A large, multi-day technological conference is planned in a country with sporadic cases of COVID-19. This conference is expected to have participants from all over the world attend. However, most will be young, healthy employees with no reported underlying health conditions. The venue for this conference will be a large convention center in the country's capital city. Once you have opened the accompanying WHO COVID-19 Generic Risk Assessment Excel file, you are ready to conduct the first part of this process, the risk assessment. We can answer the questions as follows. Number 1. Will the event take place in a host country with documented active local transmission, or in other words, a place with community spread? No. In this example, there are currently only sporadic cases being reported, so this country is not considered to have community spread, and we can give this question a score of 0 to indicate no. Question 2. Will the event include international participants from countries that have documented active local transmission, or in other words, community spread? Yes. As this mass gathering plans on having businesses from around the world attend, international participation is expected. In this example, currently many countries are reported as having community spread of COVID-19, so we must give this question a score of 1 to indicate yes. Question 3. Will the event include a significant number of participants at higher risk of severe disease? These would be people over the age of 65 or people with underlying health conditions. No. As was explained earlier in the example, most of the participants that are planning to attend are young and have no reported underlying health conditions, so we would score this question as 0 to indicate no. And question 4. Will the event be primarily indoors, and will people be in close contact with each other for a prolonged period of time? Yes. We score this question as 1 because in this example, a large convention center was planned to be the venue for this mass gathering that will take place over a few days. Therefore, our COVID-19 risk score is 2, which is considered a moderate risk. As we previously mentioned, once we receive our risk score, we move on to part 2 of the process, detailed in the decision tree, to see if any modifications can be done to reduce this risk. As the organizers of the meeting, we have discussed how we could change the meeting and determined that it must be held in person and with international participation, but perhaps we could look at holding it outside in the open air rather than in an enclosed building. Therefore, we can answer the questions as follows. Question 1. Can the mass gathering be modified so it can be held virtually? No, it must be held in person. Question 2. Can the mass gathering be modified so that there will be no international participation? No, it would not be valuable to have this mass gathering with no international participation, as we would lose most of our participants. Question 3. Can the mass gathering be modified so those at risk will no longer attend? Remember, those considered at risk are people over the age of 65 or with underlying health conditions. No. We answered no to the related question in the risk assessment that asked about ensuring those at risk were not in attendance for the mass gathering. We must therefore answer no to this question because this question is not applicable to our modifications. And question 4. Can the mass gathering be modified so that the event will be held outdoors and with limited close contact with other people? Yes, we can change the venue so that it will be held outdoors and provide mitigation measures so limited close contact between people will be practiced. Following the instructions provided on our decision tree, we've answered yes to one of the questions, so we can proceed from an original risk score of 2, which is a moderate risk, to a modified risk score of 1, a low risk. Now we have found the modified risk score of 1 on our decision tree, we can proceed to the third and final part of this process, conducting the mitigation checklist. As we mentioned before, the mitigation checklist is also found in the accompanying WHO COVID-19 Generic Risk Assessment Excel file, which is where you should have conducted the risk assessment. As there are quite a few of these questions, we will not go through and answer every single one for the purpose of this exercise. Instead, we will look at just one of the topics the mitigation checklist covers and answer the questions pertaining to that topic. The topic we will cover here is risk communication. There are 4 questions in this topic that we need to consider, and we will answer them as we go through them. Question 1. Is there a risk communication strategy for COVID-19? As the event organizers in this example, we've developed a communication strategy that includes COVID-19 considerations. Therefore, we can answer this as 2 for yes or completed. Question 2. Is there a designated person to lead media activities and tasked with managing all external communications with national and international government officials, the general public, and the media? When we developed the COVID-19 risk communication strategy, we identified a designated person to lead all of our media activities. Therefore, we can answer this as 2 for yes, completed. Question 3. Has there been monitoring of national and international media established for rumors to be able to counter them earlier? We have only just begun monitoring national and some international media for rumors, misinformation, and disinformation. However, we have not established plans to ensure this is a regular and exhaustive process. We may want to look at further effort in this area. Therefore, we can answer this as 1 for maybe in progress. And question 4. Has coordination been set up with major social media sites like Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram so that messaging can be coordinated with and assisted by these platforms? We have not coordinated with any social media to ensure our messaging is available by these platforms. Therefore, we should answer this as 0 for no, not considered. After completing the entire mitigation checklist for this exercise, we receive a score of 71%. After going back to our decision tree, that shows that with a modified risk score of 1 and a mitigation score between 26 to 75%, the overall risk for this mass gathering is considered low. This can also be shown by using the decision matrix. We find our risk score of 1, which was our new modified risk score, and the mitigation range that includes 71%, so that would be 51 to 75%, and we can see that our overall risk is low. Now that we have completed the risk assessment process, we can use this information to further refine our planning for the upcoming mass gathering. Now that we have reviewed and conducted a generic mass gathering risk assessment, we are ready to move to the next module. In Module 3, you will be learning about and using the sporting mass gathering risk assessment tool.